The celebrated prophecy of 70 weeks, or 490 years. Daniel 9, verses 24 to 27. The mass of Jews and Christians err alike in the understanding of this celebrated prophecy. The mistake lies in not perceiving that the last or 70th week is yet future, and that a long interval of time, one which has lasted for nigh 2,000 years, occurs between the close of the 69th week and the opening of the 70th, and, further, that the prophecy concerns Jerusalem and the Jewish people. The apostle had no need to write of times and seasons to Gentile Christians. 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 1. The prophecy itself clearly teaches a long gap or interval between the last 2 weeks. We transcribe the words of the prophecy in full, adding a word here and there of explanation. 70 weeks, 490 years, are determined upon thy people, the Jews, and upon thy holy city, Jerusalem, to finish the transgression, and to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. 6 blessings. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem, Nehemiah chapter 2, unto the Messiah, the Prince, Matthew chapter 21, shall be 7 weeks, 49 years, and 62 weeks, 434 years. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks, in addition to the 7, shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people, the Romans, of the prince that shall come, little horn of chapter 7, shall destroy the city, Jerusalem, and the sanctuary, the temple, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. And he, the Roman prince, shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, 7 years. And in the midst of the week he, the prince, shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations, idolatry, he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate, i.e., the desolator. To whom then does the prophecy refer? To Christians or Jews? To the latter, undoubtedly. Daniel's people, the Jews, and city, Jerusalem. The Jews and Jerusalem are the subjects of the prophecy. Verse 24. In a letter received a few years ago from one of the most distinguished students of the prophetic word, he urged the writer to study carefully the celebrated prophecy of the 70 years, as he regarded them as the key to all prophecy. The 70th week is yet future. The latter half of it is variously spoken of as 42 months, 1,260 days, time, times, and half a time. It is that solemn period referred to in the central part of the Apocalypse, one profoundly interesting and absolutely needful to understand if the prophecies are to be scripturally apprehended. Within these 70 weeks, or 490 years, the prophetic program is mapped out. Are the weeks periods of days or years? All competent Hebraists hold that the week simply denotes 7, whether of days, years, or other denomination of time must be learned from the context. The word itself does not determine. It is simply 77s. Says the learned Tregelles, I retain the word week for convenience sake, and not as implying 7 days to be the import of the Hebrew word. That they are weeks of years is evident on the surface of the prophecy. In chapter 10, verse 2, we have weeks of days. In that before us, weeks of years. But another important inquiry meets us. When did the 70 weeks or 490 years commence? We are informed that it was from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem. Now, in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, we meet with several decrees, but only one in reference to the building of Jerusalem. The others refer to the temple. This special commandment or decree is that to which the prophecy refers, and will be found fully recorded in the last historical book of the Old Testament, Nehemiah chapter 2. This decree was promulgated in the 20th year of Artaxerxes the king. Thus, then, we have the exact commencement of the 70 weeks, 455 BC. The prophecy is thus divided. 1. 7 weeks, or 49 years, occupied in the reconstruction of the city, see Nehemiah 2, which had been destroyed by the universal autocrat Nebuchadnezzar, the head of gold, chapter 2, verse 38, and the lion among beasts, chapter 7, verse 4. The books of Nehemiah and Ezra give the history of this period, or troublous times. 2. 62 weeks, or 434 years, which commenced from the city rebuilt, and the restoration of its social and ecclesiastical polity, which occupied 49 years, till Messiah the Prince. Thus, from the decree of Artaxerxes in the 20th year of his reign, Nehemiah chapter 2, commanding the rebuilding of Jerusalem, till the triumphal entry of Christ as Messiah into Jerusalem, Matthew chapter 21, we have the 2 former periods multiplied. In all, 483 years. 3. 1 week or 7 years, yet future. This interesting time, which introduces the closing sorrows of Judah, commences after the removal of the church and after the restoration of Judah to Palestine, Isaiah chapter 18. All prophecy, more or less, is concentrated in its final character in this interesting crisis. It is a week in which the gravest events which the world has ever known, political and otherwise, have their place. 4. Midst of the week of 7 years, or 3 years and a half. This last week is divided into 2 equal parts. The attention of the reader in the books of Daniel and the Revelation is fixed on the history of the second half of the week. The first half will be one of general peace, one, too, of preparation for the awful outburst of satanic blasphemy, power, and cruelty which characterizes the closing half of the week. The history of the first 3 years and a half is not written, either by the Hebrew prophet or by the apocalyptic seer. Times, days, months. A time is a year. For the force of the term time, see Daniel chapter 4 verses 16 to 37. Times, 2 years. Dividing of time, or half a time, signifies half a year. Months are of 30 days. Days are literal days of 24 hours. Now, these periods refer to the same time, namely the last half of the 70th week. They cover the period of the tribulation. It will be observed that in Revelation 11 verse 3 and 12 verse 6, days and not months or times are spoken of. The reason being that God's suffering saints are in view. Hence the days of their testimony and trial are carefully numbered. Days of interest to him who has numbered the hairs of our heads. But when the power and blasphemy of the great political enemy of God and of the Lamb, as also the persecutor of the godly-fearing part of Judah, the king of the West, is in question, and we may add, of the oppressing Gentiles as well, then the period is curtly spoken of as 42 months. Chapters 13 verse 5 and 11 verse 2. The days are twice named in reference to God's saints. The months are twice named in relation to the enemy of God's people. Times and laws, not the saints, are given into the hands of the little horn, or head of the revived Roman Empire, until a time and times and the dividing of time. Daniel chapter 7 verse 25. He rages and ravages in the wide scene of Christian profession, but especially in Palestine is his iron hand felt, not against the nation as such, but against the God-fearing part of the people who boldly witness for God in these awful times. The Antichrist will support the pretensions of the arrogant, blaspheming king, energized by Satan cast down from heaven, whose expulsion therefrom is noted in Revelation 12. Daniel 7 verse 25 and Revelation 13 verse 5 refer to the same personage and to the same period. The continuance of the last and satanic phase of the empire, chapter 17 verse 8, is limited to 42 literal months. Thus the 1260 days of suffering, 42 months of 30 days each of Gentile domination, and times, time, and half a time of Judah's abject misery synchronize. 5 months. 5 months of torment. Revelation 9 verses 5 to 10. The locust judgment under the sounding of the fifth angel is a terrible one, and spite of this assertion of Hengstenberg to the contrary, we believe that the 5 months of torment is an allusion to the ravages of the natural locust, which usually lasts 5 months. A limited and brief period is referred to, and one which may not exceed 5 months. Hour, day, month, year. An hour, a day, a month, and a year. Revelation 9 verse 15. The angels of judgment bound at the Euphrates were to be loosed, not during the time specified, but at that particular moment. These evil agencies were to be let loose at an exactly defined moment. The very hour of the day of the month and year is noted. It is an exact note of time. 3 days and a half. 3 days and a half. Revelation 11, verses 9 to 11. The dead bodies of the witnesses lying unburied in the streets of Jerusalem and exposed to the cruel and public gaze of the Gentiles is a scene of 3.5 literal days. Be it observed that the testimony of the witnesses extends during the last half of the unfulfilled week. Then they are killed, and after the public exposure of their bodies for 3 days and a half, a public resurrection is granted them. The prophetic days in Daniel and in other parts of the Apocalypse are literal. Why then should this particular passage form an exception? This is a special scene, confined in its peculiar features to events in Jerusalem. It is the beast who murders the Jerusalem witnesses. 2,300 days. 2,300 days, Daniel 8 verse 14, is an historical statement referring to the desecration of the temple and the cruel treading down of the Jewish people by the Syrian monarch of infamous memory, Antiochus Epiphanes. That there is a typical bearing on the last days of Gentile supremacy and misrule over the restored Jewish commonwealth seems evident from verses 17 and 19. Antiochus figures the future Jewish antagonist, the king of the north. 1,290 days. 1,290 days, Daniel chapter 12 verse 11. These days exceed by a month the tribulation and forced interruption of Jewish worship. They commence with the well-known and divinely appointed sign, Matthew 24 verse 15, idolatry, which will mark the commencement of the closing sorrows of the coming crisis. The extra month is needed to complete the destruction of Israel's enemies. The prophet does not speak of blessing in connection with this period, because not only must judgment clear the scene of evil and evil men, but the people themselves must be morally prepared for the full tide of millennial blessing. The days are literal, of course. 1,335 days. 1,335 days, Daniel 12 verse 12. Here 45 days are added to the former number. Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,335 days. Thus we have 75 literal days added to the 1,260 before the full blessing of Israel is secured. What a busy 2 months and a half! The tale of judgment will be finished, the filth of the daughters of Zion washed away, temple worship restored under new conditions, Ezekiel 40, and the people morally cleansed from all defilement in heart and life. Then, blessed is he who waits and reaches that moment of wondrous blessing for Israel and the earth. Postponement of the 70th week of 7 years. The present interval of grace and of Jewish degradation are coexistent, and are terminated by the translation of the heavenly saints, consisting of the changed living and raised dead. Then the last week, needed to complete the full tale of 490 years, opens with the apostate Roman prince and the apostate nation returned to Palestine, making a mutual agreement. The prince perfidiously breaks the treaty in the midst of the week. The great tribulation with its horrors immediately ensue. It is enough. The throne is satisfied, Isaiah 40 verse 2. The 7 years close, and the ancient people, chastened, saved, and blessed, enter into blessing. Her sun will never set again, and Jerusalem becomes the throne of the Lord. Jeremiah 3, verse 17. Now, unless this dispensation is seen as having its place between the 69th and the 70th week of prophecy, there must be muddling and confusion. The interval between these weeks explains much.